You are watching the world 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Here are the headlines we're tracking at the moment. US President Joe Biden has spoken with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and reiterated his clear position on a possible invasion of the Gaza border city of Rafah. This is what the White House has said. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is returning to the Middle East on his 7th diplomatic mission since the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza began more than 6 months ago. While the link between air pollution and human fatalities has been clearly established, a new piece in Lancet outlines how 20% of global type 2 diabetes is linked to chronic exposure to PM2.5 particulate matter. Tesla CEO Elon Musk arrived in Beijing on an unannounced visit where he met the Chinese premier to discuss the rollout of full self-driving software and permission to transfer data overseas. Iraq's parliament has passed a bill making same-sex relations punishable by up to 15 years in prison in a move condemned as an attack on human rights. At least 4 people are dead, including an infant, after a tornado outbreak in Oklahoma overnight, as severe storms threaten more twisters, heavy rain and large hail from Missouri to Texas in the United States. Well, a big focus, US President Joe Biden isn't backing down on his stance of Israel's impending invasion of Rafah. During a Sunday afternoon call, in fact, with Israeli Prime Minister Mr. Netanyahu, Joe Biden reiterated his clear position on the looming incursion, according to a readout that was provided by the White House. In fact, Joe Biden last month had warned that an invasion in Rafah would be a red line for his administration, pushing Israel not to pursue a military campaign in the region without a credible plan to protect civilians in place. But the recent Iranian missile attack on Israel complicated conversations between the allies, which was scheduled to take place in Washington before Iran's attack. According to the White House National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby, Israeli leaders have told US officials that such an invasion won't move forward at least until the US has had a chance to weigh in. But on the call with Mr. Netanyahu, Biden also reviewed ongoing talks to secure the release of hostages together with an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, and also discussed increases in the delivery of humanitarian assistance and aid into Gaza, including through preparations to open new northern crossings starting this week. And a Hamas delegation will visit Cairo today for talks aimed at securing a ceasefire, as per reports, as mediators stepped up efforts to reach a deal ahead of an expected Israeli assault on Rafah. Now, this delegation is expected to discuss a ceasefire proposal handed by Hamas to mediators from Qatar and Egypt, as well as Israel's response. Now, according to reports, there is some optimism about a breakthrough as far as ceasefire talks are concerned. But the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, meanwhile, who is in the Middle East, will expand his trip and continue on to Jordan and Israel after visiting Saudi Arabia, according to the State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller. In a statement, Mr. Miller said, Antony Blinken will focus on the effort to secure a ceasefire in Gaza that will see the release of hostages and also ensure humanitarian aid into the enclave continues or increases.
My dad had a saying.
Not true.
He said, Joey, your job's about
that is simply not
And joining us for the latest details from Tel Aviv, Sarah Coates at the moment. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us on the World 24/7. Sarah, what are the outcomes we are expecting from this crucial meeting in Cairo?
Yes, good morning. Well, look, you did mention that the US President Joe Biden and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, they held that phone call very late last night. Really, Biden trying to push the Israeli leader to get this deal done, to get these 133 hostages finally released. Now, we can report, according to a number of senior unnamed Israeli officials, that this deal could see some 33 hostages released rather than 40 that Israel had previously stated estimated that it wants, with 33 only believed to be alive in this humanitarian category, and that is women, children, the elderly and the sick. Now, there are also reports that Israel is willing to make a number of concessions, these being the return of people to the northern part of the Gaza Strip, which Israel had previously said it would not allow, especially men of fighting age, and also the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Nitzanim corridor, which is a corridor that the Israelis have made that now splits the strip in two. Now, as you mentioned, this Hamas negotiating team will be in Cairo meeting with senior Egyptian officials a little later today. It's important to also add that an Israeli delegation has also been invited to Cairo a little later today to really try and speed up this process. But certainly this does appear as though there may be some movement in this latest round of talks. But what we do need to remember here is that there have been, many proposals put on the table, but there has always been this one sticking point, and that is the end to the war. Israel says it will continue with its operations in the Gaza Strip, including this operation down into the southern Gazan city of Rafah, which Israel believes 4 remaining Hamas battalions are stationed, while Hamas wants an end to the war, a complete withdrawal of Israeli forces, which Israel says is something that it simply will not do.
So in a sense, there is a demand on both sides for a ceasefire, but the prospects for an actual ceasefire still remain bleak. Is that what you're hearing?
Well, certainly this is, as I mentioned, been the major sticking point time and time again. Israel says it simply will not pull out of Gaza if it doesn't go down into Rafah, where these 4 Hamas battalions, as Israel believes, are stationed. But certainly what we can expect to see over this next week is an increased delivery of aid supplies into the Gaza Strip, which is something that the Israelis have indicated that they are willing to do this week. We've also had reports that the World Central Kitchen, it will begin its operations once again today after those 7 aid workers were killed in an Israeli strike some weeks ago. So certainly really fears are mounting over this Rafah invasion. As I said, Israel says it will go ahead with this. But this is why we're really seeing this flurry of diplomacy with all of these world leaders, including US Secretary of State Blinken here in the region for his 7th visit. You mentioned he'll be in Saudi Arabia today, travelling to Israel shortly after that, really trying to listen to the Israelis and their plans over this Rafah operation, with no plan publicly released yet as to where these some 1.3 million internally displaced Palestinians that are actually sheltering in Rafah should go. So certainly a lot of concern over this region, and this is really why we're seeing this final push to try and get this deal done and to try and hold off this Rafah op.
But despite the Biden administration warning Israel against this possible Rafah invasion, the US president has signed a legislation that includes $26 billion in additional wartime assistance to Israel, if I'm not mistaken.
Certainly, and some of this money actually is for the humanitarian cause in Gaza. Analysts believe $2 billion of that will actually go down to feeding these people, rehousing these people, etc. So certainly a lot of concern. But as I did mention, Israel says it is vital for its forces to go down into Rafah, where it believes the last 4 Hamas battalions are stationed. And it also believes that this is an area where Hamas is keeping these 133 captives hidden, potentially surrounded by Hamas leaders like Yahya Sinwar down in these southern areas. So Israel certainly believes this is vital. This is why we've been seeing so much talk between the Israelis and the Egyptians. An Israeli delegation was actually in Cairo late last week discussing this Rafah operation with the Egyptians, because this is causing them a lot of security concerns, given that Rafah actually borders on Egypt, with senior officials there saying that if and when Israel actually does go down into Rafah, that this could actually jeopardise a decades-long peace treaty between the two nations if there are major spillovers of, say, tens of thousands of Palestinian refugees spilling over that border from Gaza into Egypt.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining us with that detailed update. In fact, China will host Palestinian unity talks between Hamas and Fatah in Beijing, a notable Chinese foray into Palestinian diplomacy amid the war in the Gaza Strip. As always, Sarah Coates, thank you so much for joining us live from Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, Russian officials threatened the West with a severe response in the event that frozen Russian assets are confiscated, promising endless legal challenges and tit-for-tat measures. The Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said Russia would never cede territories seized from Ukraine in exchange for the return of frozen assets. Zakharova actually wrote on the Telegram messaging app that our motherland is not for sale. Now, as you are aware, in response to Russia's war in Ukraine, the United States and its allies prohibited transactions with Russia's central bank and finance ministry and blocked about $300 billion of sovereign Russian assets in the West, most of which are in European, not American financial institutions. The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, said in a separate comment that there was still a lot of Western money in Russia which could be targeted by Moscow's countermeasures. Well, in other news, Tesla CEO Elon Musk met with Chinese Premier Li Qiang in Beijing to discuss the rollout of full self-driving software in China and permission to transfer data overseas. Now, during this meeting, the Chinese Premier told Musk that Tesla's development in China could be regarded as successful economic trade between the United States and China, noting that the two nations' fundamental interests are equal-footed cooperation as well as mutual benefits. But the Chinese Premier expressed hope for China and the United States to work together in order to promote the sustained and steady development of China-US relations. In fact, Mr. Chiang noted that China will continue to open foreign invested enterprise and will make enhanced efforts to provide further improved business environments and all-around support as well. But as you are aware, Elon Musk's trip came just over a week after he scrapped a planned visit to India to meet the Prime Minister, citing very heavy Tesla obligations. The company had actually said that this month it would lay off 10% of its global workforce as it grapples with failing sales and intensifying price war for electric vehicles that are actually led by Chinese brands. But while his touched...
Whenever you put something in a human, it takes a long time to prove the safety. But I think maybe in maybe a year or two, it can be approved for general use.
Right, so while his touchdown, you just heard the Tesla CEO saying that the brain implant that's being developed by his neurotech startup Neuralink might be approved for general use in the coming years. With that, let's turn our attention now to the United States, where hundreds of US students have been arrested as the Gaza protests spread across the country. 102 students have been arrested at Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts, and over 250 students have been arrested in New York City at protests across Columbia, NYU, and Yale as well. In Columbia, 36 students were arrested. As far as Ohio State University is concerned, there were many arrests made there as well. In Georgia, at the Emory University, 28 arrests were logged, while 38 students at Indiana University Bloomington were arrested. A further 80 students were arrested in Missouri at the Washington University in St. Louis. Meanwhile, in the West, 69 students were arrested at the Arizona State University. Right, as you can see in the West, 69 students were arrested at the Arizona State University. 90 arrests were made at the University of Southern California as far as Los Angeles is concerned. But pro-Palestinian protests at US universities, they continue nationwide, as you can see on your screens, as students continue to oppose the US's role on the war in Gaza. Meanwhile, Joe Biden has shown no mercy to Donald Trump with a series of barbed jokes about his election rival, telling a gathering of Washington's political and media elites that he's running against a 6-year-old. You must note that the former US President Donald Trump would be favored to defeat Joe Biden in the popular vote, as well as the Electoral College, if the 2024 election were to be held today. This is according to recent polling averages. But the White House Correspondents Association dinner provided the ideal platform for Mr. Biden to continue a recent run of taking the fight to Mr. Trump with cutting humor and personal insults.
The 2024 election is in full swing. And yes, age is an issue. I'm a grown man running against a 6-year-old. Trump's so desperate he started reading those Bibles he's selling. Then he got to the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. That's when he put it down and said, this book's not for me.
But the jovial mood inside that room actually contrasted sharply with demonstrations outside the Washington Hilton Hotel. Hundreds of protesters shouted "Shame on you" at White House officials, journalists and celebrities as they arrived at the dinner, condemning Joe Biden's handling of the war in Gaza, as well as the media's coverage of it.
Speak up.
A new piece in Lancet, widely considered the foremost source of research, review and opinion on health issues, outlines how 20% of global type 2 diabetes is linked to chronic exposure to PM2.5 particulate matter. Here are the details. 20% of global type 2 diabetes cases are linked to exposure to PM2.5 particulate matter. PM2.5 is a known killer and often a major component of air pollution over the subcontinent. Short-term exposure to air pollution is associated with insulin resistance, a primary predisposing condition to type 2 diabetes. The development timeline in humans is rapid, occurring within hours to days. 537 million people around the world actually have type 2 diabetes, and half of them are unaware they have the disease. This study highlights that the link between air pollution and diabetes is higher in men and groups from low socioeconomic groups and those with comorbidities. Evidence actually suggests that PM2.5 is associated with chronic kidney disease in populations both with and without diabetes. So there is a direct link between climate change and air pollution, and both can have direct and indirect effects on health. Poor air quality results in between 5 and 9 million deaths around the world, and this is an annual figure. As I said, this data has huge implications for people in the subcontinent, and as you are aware, Indians are believed to be genetically vulnerable to the onset of diabetes. And PM2.5 exposure, as a result of extremely high levels of air pollution, is making the situation worse. As always, we'll keep tracking the latest developments for you. We're stepping into a very short break. Welcome back. The Indian Coast Guard intercepted a suspicious Pakistani boat that had nearly 86 kilograms of drugs worth 600 crore rupees. Acting on intelligence, the Coast Guard, along with the Anti-Terrorism Squad and the Narcotics Control Bureau, launched a crackdown on the drug trafficking syndicate operating in this region. Now, while the drugs worth 600 crore rupees has been seized, 14 crew members from the Pakistani vessel have also been detained.
हमारी टीम अल रज़ा के पास पहुंची, उसको चैलेंज किया, जिसे देखकर उसके अंदर जो लोग थे उनके पास जो कंसाइनमेंट थे वो लोग नदी में समुद्र में फेंकना शुरू कर दिए और पूरे सर्कमस्टेंसेस को देख के इंडियन कोस्ट गार्ड के तरफ से फायरिंग करने की ज़रूरत पड़ी। फायरिंग करने के बाद अल रज़ा के जो ऑक्यूपेंट्स थे उन्होंने सरेंडर किया और हमारी टीम जो है वो अल रज़ा में गई और उसका सर्च एंड सीजर शुरू किया। गुजरात के लिए नहीं था, ये हीरोइन इंडिया के लिए भी नहीं था, ये हेरोइन जो था, ये कंसाइनमेंट जो था, ये श्रीलंका के लिए था.
Well, let's get you news now from Iraq. Human rights groups and diplomats are criticizing a law that was quietly passed by the Iraqi parliament over the weekend that would impose heavy prison sentences on gay and transgender people. Although homosexuality is taboo in the largely conservative Iraqi society and political leaders have periodically launched anti-LGBTQ campaigns, Iraq did not previously have a law that explicitly criminalized homosexuality. The law passed on Saturday with little notice as an amendment to the country's existing anti-prostitution law that imposes a sentence of 10 to 15 years for same-sex relations and a prison term of 1 to 3 years for people who undergo or perform gender transition surgeries and for intentional practice of effeminacy. Let's turn our attention to the United Kingdom now. Over 130,000 Indian students travelled to the UK just in the year 2023 for higher education. In fact, the highest number of international students in the UK are from India. But in January this year, there was nearly a 40% drop in enrolment of Indian students to the UK. What exactly is the impact of the new immigration rules there? My colleague Radhika Iyer finds out.
We are discussing the UK's immigration policy that has changed and how it is impacting Indian students who form the largest number of international students here in the UK. And I have with me a very interesting mix of students. It just so happens that I have a current student studying here, a former student who is on her post-study work visa, which came with good efforts from Lord Bilimoria, from NISAO, student bodies and activists. And I have a student who's actually a success story. Although, Nagashan, you called it unfair, which it is, I agree, you've landed a job and someone has sponsored you. Tell us about your experience and do you feel you got lucky?
Yeah, actually, I studied MSc in Computer Science in Queen Mary University of London. During that time, I started from India. I was keen interest in doing volunteering surveys for the charities and all. I just involved doing some volunteering work in London for some charity. We started doing some student activities. Actually, we deal with the students and student hotpot or something like these kind of things we started doing.
Which incidentally is also supporting students, international students living here.
Yeah, incidentally it's supporting international, not only international students, home students. It's a university students. It's concentrating. I just fall in love with the work that I used to do. After completing my MSc in Computer Science, people may say that I diverted my interest from the computer science to the charity. I thought I can implement all whatever that I learned, the technology, the technical skills and all to the charity as well. And
use it for good.
Use it for good.
And you got sponsored, which is amazing, which is absolutely amazing. And in a country such as the UK, transitions such as this from one particular specialization to the other is just so natural and so accepted. What's your experience been, Tejas?
So I'm a former student at LSE and right now I'm working on my PSW with a policy think tank based in London. I think it just so happened that I got very lucky. I think luck is the key word here. I know a lot of my fellow batchmates who are still struggling to find jobs in the current market, and the visa restrictions and the minimum salary threshold is not making it any easier for any of us. But I did form a student society on my LSE campus, which kind of was the pathway to me landing my current job. It's been really good. The experience is great. The networking is great. But the chances of me staying back and getting sponsored for a work visa seem pretty bleak still.
What would option B be then, briefly?
Probably to go back home. It doesn't make financially, it doesn't make sense for me to stay back here because the cost of living just keeps going up.
Yes.
And if I'm not getting sponsored with my visa, I don't think I would be willing to stay back.
Praniti, you're a student here at LSE at the moment studying economics.
I'm currently studying developmental
studies. Is India a lesser option considering it's looking more likely for students such as yourself who spend lakhs and lakhs of rupees to be here, live here, which is not easy? Why is the UK still such an exciting educational hub? And what is plan B if plan A doesn't work? I do not for one second perceive India to be as a lesser option for me. If anything, I am glad I took this opportunity and was able to avail an education in the UK, because studying here has changed my worldview, not only of the subject, but of the concept of education and what it constitutes by itself. And I believe after gaining such perspective, I'm at currently a crossroad, because I'm faced with two chances, either to continue here or go back. And while I believe I would love to work in an environment that has offered me so much here in the UK, working in India after gaining such a perspective will also empower me in ways that I could not, that I probably would not have received after studying here. And I believe this is why it is such a popular destination for international students. The democracy in education and the holistic nature of this education is something you will not find to the degree at which it is at which you're able to get it here. And adding on to what Tejaswini said about how the chances are bleak currently, when I look at Nagashayan, I do believe that there is hope, and you just need a bit of luck. There is